Logan Pierce grabbed Ava Mitchell by the arm and yanked her sideways hard enough that she stumbled 2 steps, then turned to the 140 troops watching in dead silence and laughed. "You really thought she could touch me?" His voice echoed across the entire arena. "I'm a Navy SEAL. I'm untouchable. This woman has no business being on this floor." Ava straightened. She did not look at the crowd. She did not look at his rank, his medals, or his 6 years of decorated service. She looked only at him. And in a voice so quiet, it somehow carried everywhere, she said, "Then prove it. If you've ever watched someone walk into a storm without flinching, stay with me until the end of this story. Subscribe to the channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels." Logan Pierce had been at Fort Meridian Naval Special Operations Center for 11 months, and in that time he had made absolutely certain that every single person on the base knew exactly who he was. Not because he was quiet about it, not because his record spoke for itself, but because Logan Pierce told people, loudly, repeatedly, with the kind of confidence that started as something admirable and somewhere along the way curdled into something else entirely. He had earned his SEAL Trident 6 years ago. That part was real. The training he had survived was brutal. The deployments he had completed were dangerous, and the decorations on his chest were legitimate. Nobody who knew the military could look at Logan Pierce's service record and call it anything less than impressive. The problem was that Logan had stopped adding to it. He had arrived at Fort Meridian on a training rotation theoretically there to share expertise with newer operators and cross-train with joint forces from multiple branches. That was the official reason. The unofficial reason, the one that his previous command had quietly communicated through careful language in his transfer paperwork, was that Logan Pierce had become difficult. Not incompetent. Not dangerous in any way that required formal action. Just difficult. He questioned every briefing he didn't personally agree with. He undermined instructors in front of their own students. He had a habit of inserting his credentials into conversations that had nothing to do with credentials. And he could not once in 11 months let anyone else be the authority in the room. His teammates at Fort Meridian had learned to manage him. They worked around his ego the way you work around a loose floorboard in an old house. You know it's there. You know what happens if you step on it wrong. So you route your path accordingly, and you don't think about it too much. Most days that worked. But some days, Logan Pierce stepped onto that loose floorboard himself. The equipment storage building at Fort Meridian was nothing special. Metal shelving, locked cages for sensitive gear, a checkout log that 3 different departments updated with 3 different systems that almost never agreed with each other. It was in short exactly the kind of place where administrative confusion happened regularly, and everyone understood that administrative confusion was part of the daily operating environment. Petty Officer Second Class Danny Reyes had been at Fort Meridian for 7 weeks. He was 22 years old, recently graduated from his initial training pipeline and assigned to the Joint Readiness Program that would occupy the next 4 months of his life. He was not careless. He was not irresponsible. He was a young sailor who had received updated storage instructions from his direct supervisor that morning, followed those instructions precisely, and placed a set of training harnesses in the cage marked for current cycle gear rather than the older storage bay that had been used the previous quarter. He had done exactly what he was told. Logan Pierce walked into that building at 0630 and found the harnesses in what he personally considered the wrong location. He did not ask who had moved them. He did not check the updated instructions. He walked directly to Danny Reyes, who was standing at the checkout counter completing his morning log, and he said loudly enough for the 4 other sailors working nearby to hear every word. "Who told you to put those there?" Danny looked up. "Sir, I was following the updated storage protocol. The memo from Chief Garrison said that current cycle equipment should be moved to—" "I don't care what the memo said." Logan stepped closer. "I've been using this facility for 11 months. That gear does not go there. Those shelves are designated for. The designation was changed 2 weeks ago, sir. Chief Garrison sent—" "Are you interrupting me right now?" Logan's voice dropped, which somehow made it more unsettling than when it was loud. "Do you know who you're talking to?" Danny's shoulders pulled back slightly. He was trying to hold his composure. He was doing a decent job of it. "Yes, sir." "Then you know that I have been operating in Navy Special Operations for 6 years. 6 years. You have been in this building for what, 7 weeks?" Logan took another step forward, close enough now that the other sailors in the room had all stopped pretending to work and were simply watching. You don't correct me based on a memo you read this morning. You don't tell me how this building works. I tell you. Danny opened his mouth. He closed it again. Because he was young, and Logan was a decorated SEAL, and the power differential in that room was not subtle. Move the harnesses back, Logan said. Do it now, and next time you get a memo that contradicts how things have always been done, you come talk to me before you act on it. Are we clear? Danny looked at the floor. Yes, sir. That was when the door opened. Lieutenant Commander Ava Mitchell had been at Fort Meridian for 3 years. In that time, she had become one of the most quietly effective instructors on the base. The word quietly was important. It was not that she was passive or soft-spoken or lacking in presence. It was that Ava Mitchell had decided somewhere early in her career that her job was to do the work, and that the work spoke clearly enough on its own that she did not need to add commentary. She had completed 2 overseas deployments. She held instructor qualifications in close-quarter combat, advanced weapons handling, tactical emergency medicine, and hostile environment survival. She had trained SEAL candidates, Marine Raider students, and intelligence officers who would go on to serve in environments nobody ever talked about publicly. She was 31 years old and had never once in 9 years of service walked into a room and announced what she was. She carried a clipboard. She was there to check out training equipment for the afternoon exercise session she would be running in 4 hours. She had no particular interest in what was happening in the back of the building, until she heard Danny Reyes say very quietly, "Yes, sir," in the voice of someone who has just been made smaller than they are. Ava walked toward the shelving area. Logan saw her and straightened slightly the way people do when someone new enters a space and they want to maintain the upper hand on 2 fronts simultaneously. "Can I help you?" he said. It was the tone of a man who had appointed himself manager of a room he did not own. Ava looked at the storage cage. She looked at the harnesses. She looked at the checkout log Danny had been filling out. "He put them in the right location," she said. Not loudly, not aggressively, just as a statement of fact delivered at normal conversational volume. Logan blinked. "Excuse me. Chief Garrison issued a storage update 2 weeks ago. Current cycle training equipment was reassigned to the near cage. He put them exactly where they're supposed to be." "And who are you?" Logan said. It was a deliberate choice. He knew the base. He had been here 11 months. The question was not a request for information. It was a move, a way of establishing that whoever she was entering a situation already in progress, and her opinion had not been solicited. Ava looked at his name patch. "I know who you are," she said. "You haven't learned mine yet. That's fine." She turned to Danny. "The harnesses stay where you put them. You followed the updated protocol. Good work." Danny nodded. The relief on his face was visible enough that everyone in the room could see it. Logan's jaw tightened. "I wasn't finished talking to him." "You were giving him incorrect information," Ava said, still calm, still even, like someone explaining weather patterns to a person who was upset about rain. "The procedure was updated. If you weren't informed, that's worth raising with Chief Garrison, but the sailor was right." "You're telling me I'm wrong." "I'm telling you the memo is right, and the sailor followed it." She picked up her clipboard and continued toward the checkout counter. "Those are 2 different things, but they both happen to be true." Logan stared at the back of her head for a moment. "I've been a Navy SEAL for 6 years, he said. It came out louder than he intended. The other sailors in the room went very still. Ava paused. She turned around. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "Being respected and being right are not the same thing." She walked to the counter, signed out her equipment, picked up her bag. Logan Pierce stood in the middle of the storage building with 4 junior sailors watching him from their peripheral vision, trying to look busy, and the words she had said sitting in the air like a fact that had just been nailed to a wall. He was still standing there when she left. He talked about it for 3 days, not loudly and not in official channels, but quietly to the people he trusted in the way that people process something that has gotten under their skin when they cannot fully admit that it has gotten under their skin. "Some instructor tried to correct me in front of a junior sailor," he told Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb that night over dinner. "Never seen her before. Doesn't know what she's talking about. Webb was 2 years Logan's senior in service, and considerably more observant than Logan sometimes gave him credit for. What was her name? I don't know. Didn't catch it. Webb chewed his food thoughtfully. What did she say that was wrong? She backed up a sailor who moved training gear to the wrong location. Was it the wrong location? It was different from where it had always been. Webb set down his fork. Logan, that's not the same answer. Logan waved a hand. The point is, she undermined me in front of junior personnel. By telling you the memo was right. By acting like she had authority to correct me. Webb looked at him for a long moment. What's her rank? Logan paused. I don't know. I didn't look. Webb picked his fork back up. Might want to find out. Logan didn't find out. He told himself he didn't need to. He spent the next 3 days cycling between mild irritation and the dismissive certainty that whoever she was, whatever she thought she knew, she had stepped into his space and tried to make him look small, and that was the part he was not going to let go. He had spent 6 years building a reputation at that wall of his. 6 years of hard service. Actual deployments. Real danger. He had earned the right to be the authority in that building, and some instructor with a clipboard was not going to walk in and redefine who he was in 4 sentences. He told himself the thing she had said was just a line. Something people said to sound deep. Being respected and being right are not the same thing. It was the kind of phrase you put on a motivational poster. It did not mean anything specific. It was not a real criticism. It was just words. But the thing about words delivered with perfect calm by someone who clearly does not need your validation is that they tend to stay longer than the loud ones. He heard it again on the 2nd day. He heard it again on the 3rd. The Joint Combat Readiness demonstration had been scheduled for 6 months. It was not a small event. Fort Meridian hosted it annually. A full-day training exhibition that brought together operators, instructors, medical personnel, intelligence staff, and new recruits from multiple branches. The purpose was threefold: to standardize certain training approaches across units, to give senior leadership visibility into program quality, and to provide newer personnel with direct exposure to advanced techniques they would be expected to apply in the field. This year's attendance list read like a summary of the entire operational community at Fort Meridian and several neighboring installations. Navy SEAL operators from 3 different teams, Marine recon instructors, Army Special Forces personnel cross-training for the quarter, intelligence officers from 2 separate units, combat medical teams, and 340 new recruits attending their first major demonstration. Total registered attendance, 440 personnel. Senior flag officers had confirmed seats in the front rows. The commanding officer of Fort Meridian himself had cleared his schedule to attend the morning session. It was by any measure not a day to be unprepared. Not a day to wing anything. Not a day to get caught on the wrong side of a professional mistake. Ava Mitchell had been selected as lead instructor for the morning's primary demonstration 6 weeks earlier. She had been briefed, had submitted her curriculum. Outline had run 2 rehearsal sessions with her support team, and had arrived at 0430 on the morning of the demonstration to run through the setup one final time. She was wearing a standard-issue training jacket with her rank and name visible on the chest. She had her water bottle, her small notebook where she kept session notes, and the quiet energy of someone who was not thinking about the audience. She was thinking about the material. She was thinking about the young operators in that room, who were going to take what they learned today into training environments where the habits they formed would eventually matter in ways that were not academic. She was not nervous. She was focused. And she had not, in the 6 weeks since she had been selected for this role, once mentioned it to anyone who had not directly asked. Logan Pierce found out about it from Webb on Wednesday night. "Who's running the morning session tomorrow?" he had asked. Not because he particularly cared, but because he was trying to plan his positioning for the day, which front row sections would give him the best visibility, whether the commanding officer was likely to do any informal networking before the session started. "Mitchell," Webb said. Logan paused. "Which Mitchell?" "Ava Mitchell, Lieutenant Commander. She's the SEAL combat instructor. 3 years at this base." The quiet returned. Logan processed that information in silence for approximately 4 seconds. "The one from the equipment building," he said. It was not a question. "Almost certainly," Webb said. There's only one instructor named Mitchell on this base, and she was apparently at the equipment building around that time. He looked at Logan with the particular expression of a man who has chosen to make his observation once and let it land where it may. She's supposed to be exceptional. Logan said nothing. I went back to his quarters that night, and he sat with the fact that the woman he had been quietly dismissing for 3 days, the one with the clipboard, the one who had corrected him in front of junior personnel, the one whose name he had not bothered to learn, was a lieutenant commander, a Navy SEAL instructor. Someone who outranked him by a meaningful margin, and had apparently been at this base longer, and had a reputation that other people use the word exceptional to describe. He sat with that. And then he made the kind of decision that people make when they cannot allow someone else to occupy the space they have claimed as theirs. He decided that tomorrow, in front of 440 people, he would prove something. Thursday morning arrived, the way mornings arrive on big operational days, fast and heavy, with a sense that the air had shifted slightly, and everything that was going to happen was already in motion. The training arena filled up in waves. Junior personnel first filling the upper rows. Senior enlist next, taking the middle sections. Officers settling into the forward seating. And then the flag-level staff arriving last, taking their positions in the front row with the quiet authority of people who did not need to navigate crowds. Logan found a seat in the 7th row. He could see the training floor clearly. He could see Ava Mitchell standing in the center of it, running through a final check of the equipment layout with 2 of her support instructors. She had her back to the audience. She was pointing at something, explaining something, making a small adjustment to the positioning of a training mat. She did not look up at the crowd. She did not look around to see who was watching. She was working. Logan watched her and felt something shift inside his chest, something that he would have described if pressed as irritation, but which was actually closer to the uncomfortable awareness that the person standing on that floor was genuinely prepared in a way that he could not dismiss and could not compete with on her terms. So he decided to change the terms. The session opened cleanly. Ava introduced the material without preamble, without performance, without the kind of theatrical energy that some instructors used to compensate for substance. She was direct. She was specific. She used language that was accessible without being simplified. She demonstrated basic principles first, then built complexity in logical sequence, moving through the material in a way that made each new concept feel like a natural extension of what had come before. Around her, the audience shifted from polite attention to genuine engagement. Junior personnel in the upper rows leaned forward. Senior operators in the middle sections began nodding at specific points. The flag officers in the front row were quiet and still. In the way that people are quiet when they are actually absorbing information, rather than simply sitting through it. For 40 minutes, the room was entirely hers. Then, Logan Pierce stood up. He waited until she had completed a demonstration sequence, and paused for the audience to process what they had just seen. It was a natural breath point in the session, a moment where questions were implicitly invited. "That works in a classroom," he said. His voice carried. He had practiced making his voice carry. But what happens when someone actually knows how to fight back? Every head in the arena turned toward him. 440 sets of eyes moved from the training floor to the 7th row simultaneously. Ava Mitchell turned. She looked at him across the distance of the arena floor. She did not show surprise. She did not show anger. She had the expression of someone who has received a piece of information and is now deciding what to do with it. The silence held for 3 full seconds. "Are you volunteering to demonstrate?" she said. Logan smiled, and he walked onto the floor. The entire arena watched him come down. He was physically impressive. That was simply a fact. 6 feet 1, 210 pounds of legitimate operational conditioning. The kind of presence that filled space and made other people adjust around it. He walked with the easy confidence of someone who has never been in a physical contest they did not win, and has stopped thinking about the possibility. He reached the training floor. He looked at Ava Mitchell. She was 5 feet 6. She was lean in the way that people who move efficiently, rather than impressively, tend to be lean. She was looking back at him with an expression that was utterly unreadable. "The rules of this demonstration are controlled movement, no unnecessary force, and professional conduct throughout," she said, addressing not just him, but the entire arena. "The purpose is to illustrate technique, not to establish dominance. Those are two different things. She looked at him. Agreed. Sure, he said. He meant this won't take long. She heard he has already decided how this ends. They set their positions. And something in the room shifted, something that happens sometimes in large crowds, when a significant number of people simultaneously realize that what they are about to watch is not what the program said it would be. The room became completely silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that comes before something that will be talked about for a very long time. Logan moved first. He moved the way he always moved in a controlled demonstration environment, with authority, with size, with the physical confidence of a man who has spent 6 years being the most capable person in most rooms he has entered. He stepped into the engagement with a forward drive designed to establish physical dominance early. It was not an attack in any technical sense. It was a statement. It was Logan Pierce's physical vocabulary for "I control this space. I control this interaction. I am what I have always been, and that is enough." His right hand came forward, and Ava Mitchell was no longer where she had been. She moved to the outside. Not away to the side, smooth and unhurried, like water redirecting around a stone that has been placed in its path. Her left hand connected with his forearm, not to block, but to guide, adding to his momentum, rather than meeting it, and his own forward drive suddenly had no floor beneath it. He felt his weight shift. He tried to correct. She had already moved again. Her right hand found his shoulder. Her footwork, silent, precise, utterly controlled, changed the geometry of his balance in a way that he could not immediately process, because he had not been in a physical exchange with someone this technically accomplished in longer than he could accurately remember. For 1/2 second, Logan Pierce experienced something he genuinely did not have a prepared response for. The sensation of being exactly where another person intended him to be. Then he was on the mat. He was face-up, left shoulder-controlled right arm in a position that a trained observer would recognize as a submission hold, applied with such measured precision that it communicated capability without requiring completion. He could not move without her permission. She held the position for 3 seconds. Then she released him, stepped back to her original position, and turned toward the audience. The entire arena was frozen. Not the dramatic frozen of a movie. The real frozen of 440 people who have just seen something that has restructured their understanding of the room they are sitting in. Ava Mitchell's voice was calm. "Size and strength are advantages," she said. "They are real advantages. The job of technique is not to pretend they don't exist. The job of technique is to understand exactly how those advantages work, and to know precisely what to do when they are used against you." She paused. The strongest person in the room is not always the one who looks strongest. Then she looked at Logan. He was standing. He had gotten to his feet with the careful composure of a man managing the gap between what he was feeling and what he was willing to show. She looked at him without judgment, without triumph, without any of the performance that would have made the moment about her. "Thank you for volunteering," she said. And then one person began to applaud. Then another. Then the sound began to build from the upper rows downward, spreading through the arena, the way sound spreads in a space that has been holding its breath, rushing in to fill the place where silence used to be. By the time it peaked, all 440 people were on their feet. Not because Logan Pierce had lost something. Because Ava Mitchell had shown them something they would not forget for the rest of their careers. The difference between a reputation and a truth. Between what you claim and what you can do. Between the kind of strength that needs to announce itself and the kind that simply moves when it is ready. The applause had barely faded before the talking started. That was always how it worked at Fort Meridian. Something happened, and within 20 minutes, the base had processed it, distributed it, and begun the long collective project of deciding what it meant. The training arena cleared out slowly after Ava's session ended, not because anyone was reluctant to leave, but because people kept stopping to talk to the person standing next to them. Senior operators pulled aside junior personnel. Officers gathered in small clusters near the exit. 3 different Navy chiefs stood in the corridor outside the arena for nearly 40 minutes, not making any particular effort to move. Logan Pierce walked out alone. He did not stop. He did not look for conversation. He moved through the hallway with his head straight and his shoulders squared in the practiced posture of a man who has decided that the thing everyone around him is discussing is something he has already processed and set aside. He had not set it aside. He made it to the empty side corridor near the equipment bay before he allowed himself to stop walking. He stood against the wall, and for 60 full seconds, he simply breathed. The sound of voices drifted from the main hallway, fragments of sentences, the occasional burst of laughter, the specific energy of a crowd that has just witnessed something worth talking about. None of what he overheard was about him. That was the part that got in. Not the fall, not the mat, not even the 3 seconds she had held that position, controlled and precise, and utterly unhurried. It was the silence after, and the applause, and the fact that the room had turned its full attention toward Ava Mitchell, and had not once, not even in peripheral courtesy, turned back in his direction. He had spent 6 years making sure rooms turned toward him. He pressed his back against the wall and told himself it did not matter. He told himself it was a controlled demonstration, and the variables had been unusual, and that anyone could be caught off balance by someone whose specific technical training had been designed precisely for this kind of exchange. All of that was true. None of it helped. Because the thing that was actually sitting in his chest, the thing he could not logic his way around, was not the physical result of what had happened on that mat. It was the expression on her face when she turned toward the audience. No triumph, no performance, no look in his direction that said, "Do you see now?" The absence of all of that was somehow harder to carry than any of it would have been. She had not needed him to lose. She had just needed the point to land, and it had landed. Marcus Webb found him there 12 minutes later. "I've been looking for you," Webb said. He leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed with the measured ease of a man who has decided to let another person come to the conversation at whatever speed they're capable of. "I'm fine," Logan said. "I didn't ask." Logan looked at the ceiling. "She's good. She's better than good," Webb said. "I've watched her run 3 different courses over the past year. She's one of the best technical instructors I've ever seen at this base. And I've been at this base for 4 years. You could have told me that." "I told you she was exceptional," Webb said. "You didn't follow up." Logan said nothing. "You also didn't find out her rank," Webb added without particular emphasis, just placing it in the room. "I know." "Logan." Webb waited until the other man looked at him. "What were you doing this morning?" The question sat between them for a long moment. Logan's jaw tightened. "Making a point." "You made one," Webb said. "Just not the one you were trying to make." Logan pushed off from the wall. "I need some air." Webb watched him go without stopping him. Some conversations needed to be started and then left alone. The person who walked away from them always came back carrying more of the truth than they had been willing to receive in the moment. Webb had learned that a long time ago. He was patient. Logan would come back. The question was whether he would come back different or just come back louder. Webb had a suspicion he knew which way it would go. He hoped he was wrong. The review board convened the following morning at 0800. It was not a court proceeding. Nobody was calling it a formal investigation. The language used in the meeting request was professional assessment of the joint demonstration session, which was the kind of institutional language that everyone in the room understood translated to something happened yesterday that senior leadership wants a clear account of. Captain Diane Holloway ran the session. She was the base's executive officer, 52 years old, 28 years of service with the particular demeanor of someone who had been in enough difficult rooms to understand that the most useful thing a senior officer could bring to a tense situation was an absolutely unruffled exterior. She was not unruffled internally. But the room would never know that. Ava sat across the table and answered every question with the same precision she brought to everything else. She described the session structure. She described Logan's interruption. She described her decision to invite him onto the floor, the parameters she had set, and the execution of the demonstration. She did not editorialize. She did not explain Logan's behavior in terms that assigned motive. She said what happened in the order it happened, and then she stopped talking. "At any point during the demonstration," Holloway said, "did you feel that the situation was unsafe?" "No, ma'am." "Did Chief Petty Officer Pierce follow the parameters you established?" Ava paused for exactly 1 second. "He departed from controlled movement when he initiated the engagement." The departure was significant enough to require a response that I would not have used in a purely educational setting. Holloway looked at her over the rim of her reading glasses. Meaning, he came in harder than the demonstration protocol called for. I adjusted. And the result was, he went to the mat and I controlled the position, Ava said. I released him as soon as the point had been established. I held nothing beyond what was necessary to illustrate the technique. Holloway made a note. Were you trying to embarrass him? No, ma'am. What were you trying to do? I was trying to teach, Ava said. The lesson happened to require a live demonstration. He chose to provide one. Holloway set down her pen. She looked at Ava for a moment. Not the assessing look of a superior, weighing whether to believe a subordinate, but something more considered. The look of a woman who recognized something in the person sitting across from her. You've been here 3 years, Holloway said. Yes, ma'am. I've read your file. I assumed you might, ma'am. It's a remarkable file, Holloway said without particular effect. The kind that makes me wonder why I haven't seen you in more of these rooms. Ava didn't answer that. Holloway nodded once, as though the silence had confirmed something she already suspected. You're dismissed, Lieutenant Commander. Thank you. Logan came in 30 minutes after Ava left. Howe was composed. He had prepared. He had spent the previous evening organizing his account of events in his head, ordering the facts in the sequence that cast the situation in its most defensible light without technically misrepresenting anything. He told Holloway that he had asked a question intended to challenge the material, not the instructor. He told her that he had volunteered in good faith. He told her that the demonstration had been professionally executed and that he had no complaints about the outcome. Holloway listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Chief Petty Officer Pierce, how long have you been at Fort Meridian? 11 months, ma'am. In those 11 months, have you reviewed any of the updated operational protocols that have been distributed to all base personnel? A pause. Some of them. The storage reorganization memo issued 6 weeks before your arrival. Another pause. Longer this time. I may have missed that one. Holloway looked at him steadily. The instructor you challenged in front of 140 personnel outranks you, has 3 years of embedded experience at this installation and was operating within established protocol in every interaction you have had with her, beginning with the equipment building. Logan held her gaze. It cost him something. Yes, ma'am, he said. Nobody is filing a formal complaint against you, Holloway said. That is partly because Lieutenant Commander Mitchell declined to do so, and partly because the incident as documented does not meet the threshold for punitive action. She paused. But I want to be direct with you about something. Ma'am, a reputation, Holloway said, is something other people hold. You cannot carry it for yourself. The moment you start trying to defend a reputation, rather than simply continuing to earn it, that is the moment it begins to erode. She picked up her pen. You are dismissed. Logan left the room. He walked back to his quarters without stopping, without talking to anyone, without performing composure for an audience that wasn't watching. He sat on the edge of his bunk and looked at the wall. He had been in the military for 6 years. He had been a Navy SEAL for 6 years. He had done things in those 6 years that very few people would ever know about, and that had cost him things very few people could understand. And none of that had mattered yesterday, not in the way he had expected it to matter. He had walked onto that floor with 6 years behind him, and come away with the specific clarifying recognition that he had been operating on a logic that was no longer connected to reality. He had confused the weight of his past with the substance of his present. He had stopped building and started defending something that could only be kept alive by the continuation of building. He had no name for that understanding yet, but it was in him now, and it was not going away. The base talked about the demonstration for the rest of the week, not maliciously. That was the thing Logan had braced himself for. The corridors dropping to whispers when he walked through the pointed looks, the performance of not looking at him. That was itself a form of looking. He had expected that, and had prepared for it, stiffening himself against what he was sure would come. What came instead was something harder to navigate than hostility. People kept talking about Ava, not about Logan going down, not about the fall or the hold, or the 3 seconds she had maintained control. They talked about the way she had released him. They talked about the way she had turned toward the audience without a single glance back at him, that could have been read as triumph. They talked about what she had said: the strongest person in the room is not always the one who looks strongest. That sentence was everywhere. Logan heard it at breakfast on Friday from a pair of junior operators who stopped talking when he sat down nearby. Not because they were talking about him specifically, but because they had the social awareness to recognize that the sentence might land differently in his proximity. He heard it again on Saturday from a Marine recon instructor who was quoting it to a group of new recruits in the corridor outside the gymnasium. He heard it on Sunday from Webb, who did not quote it directly, but referenced it in the context of a conversation about leadership, and then watched Logan's face with the quiet attention of someone performing a careful diagnostic. "She said it without any drama," Webb observed. "That's what got people. She wasn't trying to make a point to the audience. She was just saying a true thing." "I know," Logan said. "Do you?" Logan looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," Webb said carefully, "that there's a difference between understanding that someone is right and actually sitting with what that means for how you've been operating." Logan was quiet. "You've been doing this thing," Webb continued, "for as long as I've known you, where you lead with the credential, where the first thing out of your mouth in a disagreement is the reminder of who you are and what you've done." He paused. "Do you know why you do that?" Logan thought about it. Really thought about it in a way he had not made room for recently. "Because it's worked," he finally said. "It worked," Webb corrected. Past tense. "It worked in environments where the people around you didn't have the standing to push back." He held Logan's gaze. "Yesterday you walked into a room where someone had more standing, more expertise, more rank, and more composure than you. And your only move was the one that used to work." Logan said nothing. "She doesn't do that," Webb said. "She never does that. Do you know what I've heard her say about her own record in 3 years of working in proximity to her?" Logan looked up. "Nothing," Webb said. "Not once. Not in a professional argument, not in a briefing where her opinion was questioned, not in a situation where most people would have led with everything they'd earned." He leaned forward slightly. "And yet every senior person on this base knows exactly what she's capable of, because they watched her work." Logan absorbed that. "The credential is the fallback," Webb said. "It's what you reach for when you're not sure the work is going to speak for itself. And if you're sure it will, then you don't need to reach for anything." Logan sat with that for a long time after Webb left. He sat with it through dinner and through the quiet of Sunday evening and into Monday morning when the base returned to its operational rhythm and the demonstration became last week's conversation and everyone moved on to the next thing. Everyone except Logan. Because Webb had said something that was circling in him like a current he had not chosen to swim in, pulling at something he had been carrying so long, he had stopped recognizing it as weight. The person who felt it first was Danny Reyes. The young sailor had been at the base for 7 weeks when the confrontation in the equipment building happened. He had watched a lieutenant commander correct a decorated SEAL operator on a point of protocol with the calm of someone correcting a phone number, and the experience had reconfigured something in the way he understood authority. He had grown up believing that authority was a function of title. That rank meant right. That the person with more decorations had more truth. His first 7 weeks at Fort Meridian had not substantially challenged that assumption, because most of the people above him had operated within its logic, leaning on rank to settle disagreements, letting seniority function as the last word. Ava Mitchell had not done that. She had simply known the protocol. She had simply been correct. And her correctness had not required his validation, or Logan's acceptance, or the room's approval. It had simply been what it was, a fact, standing on its own. Danny started paying attention to Ava after that. Not in a way that was performed or calculated, just the natural attention of someone who has seen something worth observing and wants to understand it better. He watched her run sessions. He watched her interact with senior officers who tried to redirect her agenda mid-session without causing a confrontation. She redirected back smoothly in ways that acknowledged their authority while maintaining the structural integrity of what she was trying to teach. He watched her work with junior recruits who were struggling, saw the particular patience she deployed without being soft specific, without being condescending. He started asking questions. Not to her directly. Not yet. He asked the people who worked around her, the support instructors, the senior enlisted in her department, the few operators who had been through her advanced certification course. The thing they all said in different words and different orders was the same: she had been doing this work for 9 years, and in 9 years, she had never once stopped being the most prepared person in the room. Not because she was trying to be better than everyone else, because she genuinely could not imagine approaching the work any other way. She told me once, said Chief Petty Officer Sandra Okafor, who ran the administrative coordination for Ava's department and had worked alongside her for 2.5 years, that the worst thing you can do in this profession is start coasting on what you already know. Because the person you're responsible for training doesn't care what you knew last year. They need what you know right now. Danny wrote that down in the small notebook he kept in his left breast pocket. He wrote other things down too. Things he observed. Things people said. Things he started noticing about the difference between the operators who led with presence and the ones who led with capability. He was 22 years old, and he was learning something that some people spent entire careers never learning. How was learning the difference between what you are and what you show people, and how the most trustworthy version of any professional was the one where those two things were exactly the same. It was on a Tuesday, 10 days after the demonstration, that Logan Pierce did the thing nobody expected. He requested a one-on-one session with Ava Mitchell. The request came through the official scheduling system, which was the detail that surprised people the most when word got around. Not a hallway ask. Not a message passed through a mutual contact. A formal session request submitted through the appropriate channel with the stated purpose listed as Review of Close Quarter Engagement Principles. Ava saw the request on Wednesday morning. She looked at the name for a moment. Then she accepted it. They met that Friday afternoon in one of the smaller training rooms, just the two of them, no support staff, no junior personnel. Logan arrived 3 minutes early, which was a choice she noticed without commenting on. She was already there, already set up, already holding the same quiet energy she carried everywhere. For the first 30 seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Logan said, "I don't know how to start this." "You already started it," Ava said. "You put in the request." He nodded. He looked at the training mat on the floor between them, and then he looked back at her. "I've been leading with my credentials for a long time," he said. "I didn't realize that was what I was doing. I thought I was establishing context. I thought I was just being clear about who I was." Ava waited. "The thing is," he said, "I think I started doing it because the work was speaking for itself, and I wanted to make sure people understood what they were seeing. And somewhere between then and now, the work stopped being the point, and the credential became the thing I was using instead." Ava said nothing. "That's not an excuse," he said. "I'm just trying to understand what happened." "What happened," Ava said carefully, "is that you confused what you had done with who you currently are. Your record is real. Your trident is real. Everything you earned is real." She paused. "But a credential is a description of past performance. The person who has to show up today isn't your record. It's you." Logan was quiet. "What you're capable of," she continued, "is still there. That doesn't go away. But when you lead with the credential instead of the capability, you put all of the weight on something that cannot grow." She looked at him steadily. And then when someone challenges the credential, not the capability, just the credential, it feels like they're challenging everything, because you've put everything there." Logan exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly what it felt like." "I know," she said. "I've seen it before. And every time the person who gets past it ends up being more effective than they were before, because they stopped protecting something that didn't need protection and started building something that does." Logan looked at her. "What made you the way you are?" he said. The question surprised her slightly. He could see it. "A lot of things," she said. "Some of them I'm not sure I could fully explain." She thought about it for a moment. "But the clearest one is, I had a supervisor early in my career who was the most capable person I had ever worked around. Technically, tactically, every dimension, and she never once mentioned it." She paused. "I watched her get questioned and undermined, and talked over by people with louder voices and bigger egos, and she never led with anything except the next right thing to do. And every single time the room caught up to her. Not because she demanded it, because the work was there." "Did it bother her?" Logan asked. "Being talked over, being dismissed?" Ava considered that. "I asked her once. She said it bothered her the first time. After that, she realized that the people doing it were telling her something useful. What were they telling her? That they needed to be the loudest voice because they weren't sure the other voices would hear them. She looked at Logan with something that was not quite a smile, and not quite something else. People who are genuinely confident don't need the room to stay quiet for them to be heard. Logan Pierce sat with that for a very long time. The training room was still. The bass was doing what the bass always did. Operational, rhythmic, indifferent to individual reckonings. Outside this room, the week continued. Drills were run. Reports were filed. Danny Reyes was somewhere learning something. The arena that had held 440 people was empty and would stay empty until the next event. Logan looked at Ava Mitchell across the mat that separated them. "Can we run through some of the fundamentals?" he said. "From the beginning. Like I don't know anything." Ava looked back at him. "That's exactly where you start," she said. And for the first time since she had walked into the equipment building and found him standing over a young sailor with his credentials raised like a weapon, Logan Pierce looked not like a man defending something. He looked like a man who was ready to learn. The session started the following Monday. No announcement. No schedule circulated to other personnel. Logan Pierce showed up to the training room at 0600 and Ava Mitchell was already there, and they worked for 90 minutes without an audience and without anyone outside that room knowing exactly what was happening inside it. That lasted approximately 4 days. Fort Meridian was not a large base. It was a community in the specific way that military installations become communities. People who live in proximity, eat in the same hall, run the same routes, and notice the same things. When Logan Pierce, who had spent 11 months making sure every room knew he had arrived, began appearing in the early morning training rotation without making any noise about it, people noticed the absence of noise more than they would have noticed the noise itself. Chief Sandra Okafor noticed first. She handled scheduling for Ava's department and had therefore seen the room booking appear in the system. She mentioned it to no one, which was her way. She processed information, filed it, and allowed it to inform her understanding of the world without performing that understanding for an audience. Marcus Webb noticed on Thursday, when Logan came to breakfast with his hands slightly roughed up in the way that came from extended mat work, and did not explain why. Danny Reyes noticed on Friday, not because he had any direct knowledge, but because he had been paying careful enough attention to Ava's daily rhythm to recognize when something in it had shifted. None of them said anything to each other. Not yet. But the information was circulating in the way that information circulates in a place where people share space and pay attention quietly without announcement, building into a collective awareness that nobody had formally agreed to accumulate. Inside the training room, something real was happening. Ava had started Logan from the ground up. Not as a punishment, not as a statement, simply because she had watched him move in that arena and understood immediately that his technique, which was functional and even impressive within its own framework, had been built on a foundation of physical dominance rather than mechanical efficiency. He was strong. He was fast. He had been in enough real situations to develop genuine operational instinct. But he had also spent 6 years winning through size and aggression and the specific intimidation factor that came from being Logan Pierce in a room full of people who knew who Logan Pierce was. And because it had worked, he had never been forced to examine what would happen if those advantages were neutralized. Now he knew. The first week was uncomfortable in ways Logan had not fully anticipated. Not physically, he could handle physical discomfort, had trained for it, and through it for years. The discomfort was something closer to the surface. It was the experience of being a beginner at something he was supposed to be an expert in. It was the specific vulnerability of not knowing the next step when your professional identity had been built on always knowing the next step. "You're fighting the movement," Ava told him on the third morning, watching him try to execute a redirection sequence she had demonstrated twice. "You're putting your strength against it instead of into it." "They feel like the same thing," Logan said. "They're not. Fighting it means you're trying to overpower the problem. Using your strength means you understand the geometry and you're adding your power to the correct point." She stepped in next to him. "Do it again. But this time, don't decide the outcome before you move." He looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means stop thinking about where you're going to end up and start thinking about where you are right now." She settled into the starting position. "The reason you lost on the mat in the arena was not because I was stronger. It was because you had already decided what was going to happen. You were managing a result, not responding to a moment. He absorbed that. Again, she said. He moved again. It was better. Not much, but measurably. Ava could feel the difference, the slight reduction in resistance at the pivot point, the small shift in his weight transfer that indicated he was listening to the movement rather than dictating it. There, she said quietly. That. Logan stopped. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at her. I've been doing it wrong for 6 years. You've been doing it right for a different purpose, she said. Size and strength against opponents who can't neutralize them, your technique works. You just walked into a situation where the neutralization was the entire point of the exercise. He was quiet for a moment. I should have known that. You do know it, she said. You just stopped thinking about it because you stopped encountering situations that required you to. There it was again. That quality of hers, the ability to say the hardest thing in a way that felt like information rather than indictment. Logan had been around enough instructors to know that this was not an easy thing to do. Most people, even good ones, could not separate the correction from the judgment. They delivered critique the way they had received it, wrapped in enough friction that the recipient spent half their energy managing the relationship rather than absorbing the lesson. Ava delivered critique the way she moved on a mat. Precisely, efficiently, and without any force beyond what was necessary. Logan was beginning to understand that these two things were not coincidental. By the end of the second week, the sessions had changed shape. Logan was asking questions that went beyond the mechanics, not because Ava had invited it, but because the physical work was opening something in him that wanted to understand the source, rather than just the technique. When did you know this was what you were supposed to do? He asked on a Wednesday morning after they had run through an hour of work and were both cooling down. Ava considered the question. No is a strong word. When did you feel it then? She was quiet for a moment. My second deployment, she said. We were running a joint training program in a forward environment. I had 2 operators under my instruction who were technically qualified but had gotten into a competitive dynamic with each other that was degrading their performance. They were so focused on outcompeting the other person that neither of them was actually learning anything. Logan listened. I had to figure out how to break that pattern without making either of them feel like they had lost something, she said. Because if they felt like they'd lost something, they'd dig in deeper, and the situation would get worse. She paused. I spent 3 days trying to find the approach. And when I found it, it wasn't a technique, it was a question. What was the question? I asked each of them separately, what is the goal of this training? She looked at Logan with a slight tilt of her head. You know what they both said? To be better than the other guy, Logan guessed. To be ready, she said. Both of them. In private, without the other person watching, they both said the same thing. To be ready for what comes next. To be prepared enough that the people depending on them would be safe. She paused. So I held them to that, not to each other, to their own stated purpose. And once they were operating inside that framework instead of inside the competition, the learning happened fast. Logan looked at her. What does that have to do with knowing this was what you were meant to do? Because the moment they both said ready, she said quietly, something in me recognized that the most important thing I could contribute was not being the best at the thing. It was helping other people find their own clearest version of it. She was still for a moment. I can run the technique. I can execute the mission. I've done both. But the thing that makes me want to get up at 04:30 every morning is not the execution. It's watching someone figure out something they couldn't figure out before. The room was quiet. Logan looked at the floor between them. Nobody's ever said something like that to me, he said. Like what? Like that the point might not be being the best at it, that the point might be something further out. He looked up. I think I've been operating on the assumption that being the best was the whole mission. It gets you started, she said. It keeps you working when the work is hard. But if it stays the whole mission... She paused. Then every room becomes a competition, and every person in that room becomes either an audience or a threat. Logan looked at her. That's what I've been doing, he said. It was not a question. I know, she said simply. And then, ready. He stood up, rolled his shoulders. Ready. They went back to work. It was on a Thursday afternoon in the third week that the first outside person entered the picture in a way that could not be contained to a single conversation. Captain Holloway called Ava into her office. Ava had been expecting a follow-up at some point. The initial review had closed without formal action, but Holloway was not the kind of officer who considered a closed file a finished matter. She was the kind of officer who returned to things when enough time had passed for the situation to reveal its actual shape. Ava sat across from her and waited. "I've been hearing things," Holloway said. "Ma'am. About early morning sessions in the small training room, about Chief Petty Officer Pierce." She studied Ava. "Is that your initiative or his?" "His," Ava said. Holloway absorbed that without visible reaction. "And?" "He's making real progress," Ava said. "The technique issues are mechanical and correctable. They'll take time, but the trajectory is good." She paused. "The other thing is taking longer." "The other thing," Holloway repeated. "The way he has been operating professionally," Ava said carefully. "The pattern of leading with credential rather than capability. He's aware of it now. Awareness is the first step, but it is not the same as the habit being changed." "No," Holloway agreed. "It is not." She looked at Ava steadily. "You understand that what you're doing in that room carries some institutional weight?" "Ma'am, if Pierce comes out of this better technically and professionally, that reflects on how this base handled the situation. If he comes out of it the same or worse, then we have a longer problem." Holloway was direct without being heavy. "I want to know how you're reading it." Ava took a breath. "He asked to be taught from the beginning," she said, "without ego in the request. That's not something people do unless something in them has actually shifted." She paused. "I don't know where he lands, but I don't think he's the same person who walked into the arena." Holloway nodded once. "Keep me informed if anything changes." "Yes, ma'am." "And Mitchell." Ava paused at the door. "The session file has been reviewed by Admiral Kearns," Holloway said. "He watched the recording of the demonstration. He had one comment." Ava waited. "He said, and I'm quoting him directly, that it was the most effective professional instruction he had observed in a command environment in 11 years. Ava stood in the doorway. "I mentioned this," Holloway said, "not to make you self-conscious about the work, but because there is a conversation happening at a level above this office about what the right role for you at this installation looks like going forward." She held Ava's gaze. "You should know that conversation is happening." Ava said, "Thank you, ma'am." She walked back to her department with the information sitting in her chest. Not with pride exactly, and not with anxiety, but with something more like the weight of understanding that the work you do in private does not always stay private. That was not why she did it. But when it reached the surface, she had to be ready for what came with it. She was ready. She had been ready for a long time. Danny Reyes found her in the corridor near her office on a Friday afternoon. He had been working up to the conversation for most of the week, which she could tell from the way he stood slightly too upright, the posture of someone who has rehearsed. "Lieutenant Commander," he said. "Do you have a minute?" "Yes," she said. "I wanted to ask you something, about what happened in the equipment building." She looked at him. "All right. When Pierce was when he was—" Danny stopped, restarted. "When he was wrong about the storage location and you corrected him. Were you scared?" The question surprised her. Not the content of it, she had been asked versions of it before. It was the specificity of his fear that caught her. He was not asking about courage in the abstract. He was asking about a particular moment in a particular room because he had been in that room and he had been the one standing at the counter with his hands trembling, and he needed to understand how someone else had walked into the same room and stood still. "No," she said. "Not scared." "What were you—" She thought about it honestly. "Calm," she said. "Because I knew the protocol was correct. When you know you're right, not because you believe it, but because you've verified it, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's just a fact that needs to be said." Danny processed that. "But he's a SEAL. He's been here longer. He has more rank than me, and probably more experience than most people I'll ever—" "None of that changed the memo," she said. He stopped. "His experience is real," she continued. "His record is legitimate. None of that changes whether the harnesses were in the right location. Those are two separate facts, and you can hold both of them at the same time. Respecting what someone has done does not require agreeing with what they are currently saying. Danny looked at her. I didn't know how to say that. Now you do. He was quiet for a moment. Can I ask one more thing? Yes. Why did you do it? He said. You didn't have to. You could have walked past. He wasn't doing anything to you. Ava looked at him steadily. He was doing something to you. Danny stood very still. The people around you who have more power than you, it is not enough for them to simply not harm you, she said. It matters whether they say something when someone else is. She paused. I've had people say something when I needed it, and people who didn't. She looked at him with complete directness. I know the difference it makes. Danny nodded. He swallowed once. He looked like he was managing something that did not have a name yet. Thank you, he said. She nodded and kept walking. He stood in the corridor for a moment longer, holding the conversation like something he was not quite ready to put down. The twist came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks and 4 days after the demonstration. 16 days into the morning sessions. 9 days after Holloway's office, and the Admiral's comment, and the conversation that Ava had carried quietly without mentioning it to anyone. Logan arrived at the training room at 0600 as he always did. But that morning, he was not alone. 3 operators came in behind him. Petty Officer First Class James Trevino, who had been on Logan's team for 2 years. Senior Chief Elena Vasquez, who had a decade of operational experience and the specific reputation of someone who said very little but saw everything. And Lieutenant Junior Grade Carter Webb, Marcus Webb's younger brother. 6 months into his first assignment at Fort Meridian, technically sharp, and still learning the social architecture of the base. Logan had brought them, without asking Ava first. She stood at the edge of the mat and looked at the 4 of them and felt the particular quality of a situation that has changed shape without your input. I told them what we were doing, Logan said. They asked to observe. Ava looked at him for a moment. They don't observe, she said. If they're in the room, they work. Logan looked back at her. Something passed across his face, surprise first, and then something that was closer to respect. Understood, he said. Vasquez, Ava said, turning to the senior chief. What's your training background? Vasquez folded her arms. 2 tours combat diver cert SEER instructor qualified. And your weakest technical area? Vasquez paused. Nobody asked her that. People asked about her strongest areas. People led with what they had. She looked at Ava for a moment, with the assessing gaze of someone who was deciding whether the question deserved an honest answer. Ground control transitions, she said finally. Once I establish a position, I hold it instead of flowing to the next one. Good, Ava said. That's where we start. She looked at Trevino, at Carter Webb, at Logan. Nobody in this room performs what they know, she said. Everybody in this room works on what they don't. She looked at each of them in turn. That is the only reason to be here. If you want to demonstrate capability, the arena is down the hall. Nobody moved. Nobody left. They worked for 2 hours. It was the hardest session Logan had run in 3 weeks. Not because the material was more complex, but because he was no longer the only student in the room, and the experience of being visibly corrected in front of people who knew him. People who had operated alongside him, who had built their understanding of who he was, around a very particular image, required a different kind of discipline than being corrected in private. Ava corrected him 3 times in the first 40 minutes. The 3rd time, Trevino made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Logan looked at him. You think it's funny when she corrects me, Logan said. Not with heat, with a kind of flatness that was almost worse. A little, Trevino admitted. Good, Logan said. Because she's going to correct you in about 30 seconds, and I want you to think it's funny then too. Trevino looked at Ava. She had already moved into position. I was on the mat in 7 seconds. The room erupted. Not chaos, the compressed, startled laughter of 4 people who have all simultaneously been reminded that they are less prepared than they thought they were. Vasquez, Carter Webb, even Logan, for a brief involuntary moment, his face breaking open before he pulled it back. Trevino got up grinning. Okay, he said. Okay. That was yeah. Okay. Again, Ava said. The shape of the room had changed, not because she had established dominance, not because anyone had been embarrassed into submission, but because she had done in 2 hours what some instructors could not do in a semester. She had made the room safe enough for experienced professionals to be genuinely bad at something in front of each other. That was the rarest thing. That was the thing that Logan had been watching from the inside for 3 weeks and had not had language for until he saw it happen to someone else and recognized what it felt like from the outside. She was not teaching technique. She was teaching them how to learn. By the time the session ended, all 4 of them were breathing hard, had been corrected more times than they could have predicted, and had also, each of them in their own way, improved in measurable, specific, repeatable ways. They stood at the edge of the mat before leaving. Vasquez spoke first. Same time Thursday. Ava looked at her. Same time Thursday. Vasquez nodded and walked out. Trevino and Carter Webb followed. Logan was last. He stopped at the door. He turned back. When I brought them, he said, I should have asked you first. That was my call to make and I didn't check it with you. I'm sorry. Ava looked at him. In 3 weeks, she had corrected his technique dozens of times. She had challenged the way he thought about authority and capability and the relationship between the two. She had said hard things to him with the kind of precision that made them land instead of deflect. This was the first time he had apologized to her for something that was not a physical mistake. Thank you, she said. It was not absolution. It was receipt. A simple acknowledgement that he had said the thing that needed saying and that it had been heard. He nodded. He walked out. Ava stood in the empty room for a moment. Outside Fort Meridian was continuing its operational day. Reports being filed. Briefings running on schedule. Danny Reyes, somewhere in a classroom applying things he had not known 3 weeks ago. Holloway in her office managing the invisible infrastructure that kept a base of this size functional. Admiral Kearns, somewhere above all of them, in a conversation about the future that Ava was apparently part of, without having been formally invited to join. She looked at the mat. She thought about the 2 operators from her second deployment, both of whom had said the same word in private. Ready. She thought about her supervisor from early in her career, the woman who had been talked over by loud men for 2 decades and had never once led with anything other than the next right thing to do. She thought about Logan Pierce, standing in the doorway of the equipment building, 11 months into his assignment at Fort Meridian, credential raised, and posture set, and absolutely certain he was the most important person in the room. She thought about the version of him who had just walked out of this training room. Something was changing in him. It was not complete. It would not be complete for a long time. The habits of 6 years did not dissolve in 3 weeks of early morning sessions, no matter how honestly anyone showed up for them. There would be setbacks. There would be moments when the old pattern pulled harder than the new one, and he would reach for the credential because it was familiar, and the other thing was, not yet. But it was in motion. And the thing about something genuinely in motion was that it was very hard to stop. She picked up her bag. She turned off the light. She walked into the morning and went back to work. The group sessions had been running for 2 weeks when the base found out about them. Not through any official announcement. Not through a memo or a scheduling post or a formal program designation. The way Fort Meridian found out was the way Fort Meridian found out about most things, through the accumulation of small observations made by people who paid attention, assembled into a picture that nobody had planned for anyone to see. Chief Sandra Okafor mentioned to a colleague that the small training room had been booked continuously every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 0600 for 5 weeks. The colleague mentioned it to a senior enlisted coordinator who knew Vasquez and knew that Vasquez did not voluntarily add anything to her morning schedule unless she had concluded it was worth her time. Vasquez's reputation for selectivity was on this base essentially ironclad. If she was showing up to something at 6 in the morning, the something was real. Word reached Marcus Webb through Carter, who mentioned it in passing over a phone call on a Sunday afternoon. Webb processed the information quietly, which was how he processed everything, and said nothing to Logan directly. But he started watching Logan the way you watch someone who has been sick for a long time, and maybe getting better carefully without making the observation visible, because the act of naming it too early sometimes interrupted the recovery. By the fifth week, senior personnel in two separate departments had asked Ava whether the morning sessions were something that could be expanded to additional participants. She told them she would think about it. She thought about it for 3 days. She thought about what happened to the nature of a thing when its size changed, whether what was working in a room of 4 people would survive the introduction of 12 or 20, or the kind of formalization that came with a number large enough to require a curriculum document and a scheduling system and a line item in someone's monthly report. She thought about her supervisor from the early deployment, the one who had never announced anything, the one who had built her entire approach on the principle that the work itself was the only reliable advertisement for the work. On the third day, she told the senior personnel that she would open the sessions to a limited expansion, 6 additional participants selected by demonstrated need rather than rank rotating monthly, so that a larger group could cycle through over time. She did not submit a program proposal. She did not ask for a budget line. She did not give it a name. She just expanded the booking in the scheduling system by 30 minutes and told Vasquez, who told Trevino, who told 3 other people. And by Thursday, the room was fuller and the work continued. Logan noticed the expansion without commenting on it. He noticed it the way you notice when a plant you have been watching has put out a new branch with a quiet satisfaction that belongs to the observer rather than the thing being observed. He had no ownership over what was happening in that room. He understood that now, in a way, he had not understood it 6 weeks ago. He was a participant. The fact that his request had started the private sessions did not make him their author. Ava was the author. Had always been the author of this and of the larger thing she was quietly building at this base, the thing that had no name and needed none. How was learning, among other things, how to be inside something without trying to claim it. That was harder than the mat work, by a significant margin. The news arrived on a Wednesday morning 3 minutes before the 0600 session was scheduled to start. Logan was already in the training room. Vasquez and Trevino were there. 2 of the newer participants, Lieutenant Mara Chen, an intelligence officer with a background in field operations, and Petty Officer First Class Ray Dominguez, who had a decade of combat diving experience and had come to the session at Vasquez's specific recommendation, were running through warm-up movement on the far side of the mat. Ava walked in 4 minutes late. This had never happened before. In 6 weeks, she had always been in the room before anyone else arrived. Not because she made a performance of it, but because being first was simply part of her operating rhythm, as natural and unthought as breathing. The 4 minutes were noticeable. When she came through the door, Logan read her face in the specific way that people who have spent weeks in close professional proximity learn to read each other's faces, not intrusively, not with presumption, but with the accumulated pattern recognition that comes from repeated observation of how a person moves when everything is ordinary and how they move when something has changed. Something had changed. She set her bag down. She looked at the group. "We're starting with ground transitions today," she said. "Chen and Dominguez, you'll work the first sequence together. Vasquez and Trevino pick up where you left off on Monday. Logan with me." The room began to move. When they were positioned slightly apart from the others, Logan said quietly enough that it did not carry "what happened." She looked at him. "Orders came through this morning." He waited. "I've been reassigned to the Joint Special Operations Training Command," she said. "Senior instructor position. The role starts in 8 weeks. Logan processed that for a moment. The Joint Special Operations Training Command was not a lateral move. It was a significant step, the kind of assignment that came to people after a review at a level above their immediate installation, the kind that required flag officer recommendation and a specific kind of institutional confidence in the person being moved. The Admiral's comment. Holloway's office. The conversation at a level above this office. He had not known the specifics, but he had known something was in motion. 8 weeks, he said. Yes. That's a significant assignment. He paused. Congratulations. That's the right word. I think so, she said. It's also complicated. He looked at her. It was the first time in 6 weeks she had described anything with that word. Because of this, he said, meaning the room, the sessions, the thing that had no name. Because of several things, she said. This is one of them. She held his gaze. You have 7 weeks left with access to this work. The question is what you do with them. He heard what she was saying underneath the practical statement. She was not asking what he was going to do in the sessions. She was asking what he was going to do with what the sessions had built in him, whether the thing that had shifted in him over the past 6 weeks would hold its shape when the external structure that had supported it was gone. Whether he would keep building in the dark when nobody was watching, and the room was empty, and the only person who would know was himself. "I'll use them," he said. "I know," she said. Then she moved into the work, and the room continued, and the conversation was set aside in the way that conversations in that space were always set aside, not abandoned, but absorbed, folded into the ongoing project that was not really about technique at all. The session ended at 0800. As the group filtered out, Dominguez lingered. He had been in the expanded sessions for 10 days and had said relatively little during that time, which had initially struck Logan as reserve, but which he was coming to understand was actually the opposite. Dominguez was quiet because he was absorbing everything, running it through an internal process that was thorough and unhurried and very difficult to rush. "She's leaving," Dominguez said to Logan, not as a question. 8 weeks, Logan said. Dominguez nodded. He looked at the door she had gone through. "What happens to this after?" Logan had been thinking about the same thing for the 40 minutes since she had told him. "I don't know." "You could keep running it," Dominguez said. Logan looked at him. "I'm not her," Logan said. "No," Dominguez agreed. "But you know more now than you did 6 weeks ago, and the people in this room trust you in a way they didn't 6 weeks ago." He paused. "That's not nothing." Logan thought about that. "The credential thing," Dominguez said with the directness of someone who had decided the moment called for it. "We all saw it in the arena. Most of us recognized it because we'd been doing versions of the same thing." He paused. "Watching you work through it, that was more instructive than anything I could have read in a field manual." Logan looked at him for a moment. "I was a bad example," Logan said. "You were a real example," Dominguez said. "That's different." He walked out. Logan stood in the empty room for a moment. The mat, the quiet, the particular stillness of a space that had held a lot of honest work and now held the echo of it. He thought about what Dominguez had said. He thought about Ava's question, what he was going to do with what the sessions had built in him. He thought about Danny Reyes, who he had humiliated over a storage memo that he had not bothered to read, and who had been going to his own classes every day since learning things with the particular hunger of someone who has been given a clear example of what genuine competence looks like and wants to understand how it works. He thought about Vasquez, who had named her weakest area in the first session without being asked twice. Vasquez, who had a decade of experience and a reputation that required zero external maintenance, who had said ground control transitions with the same matter-of-fact precision she brought to everything, and had then spent the past 5 weeks systematically fixing it. I thought about what it had felt like to be wrong about the storage protocol and unable to acknowledge it. And he thought about what it had felt like 3 weeks later to apologize to Ava for bringing the group without asking, and to have her simply say thank you, not forgiving him, not making a performance of the restoration, just receiving the acknowledgement and moving on. He was still thinking when Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway. "She told you," Webb said. "This morning." Webb came into the room. He looked around the space with the particular attention of someone seeing it clearly for the first time, even though he had known for weeks that it existed. 8 weeks. "Yeah." "What are you going to do?" Logan looked at him. "Keep working," he said. "And maybe try to keep this going after she's gone." Webb was quiet for a moment. "That's different from what you would have said 6 weeks ago," he said. 6 weeks ago, I would have been trying to figure out how to make the whole thing about me." Webb almost smiled. "And now?" Logan looked at the mat. "Now I'm trying to figure out how to make it about the work." He paused. "That turns out to be harder." "It always is," Webb said. Danny Reyes had his evaluation on the same Wednesday. It was his first formal performance assessment since arriving at Fort Meridian. Standard process: a review of his progress through the Joint Readiness Program, a skills assessment conducted by his department supervisor, and a brief session with a senior officer who would sign off on his quarterly standing. He had been preparing for 2 weeks. Not obsessively, he was not the kind of person who collapsed under assessment pressure. but carefully in the way he had learned to do things since arriving at this base. Verified, not just believed. Checked against the actual standard, rather than against his own estimate of what the standard might be. His supervisor was Lieutenant Keating, a compact, efficient woman who ran the administrative and logistics coordination for the readiness program, and who had, in Danny's 7 weeks under her supervision, never once given him feedback that was not specific and accurate. The assessment went well. Danny knew it was going well, not because Keating told him so. She did not comment during the assessment itself, but because the questions she was asking had escalated in complexity as the session continued, which was what happened when a supervisor was testing the ceiling of your capability rather than verifying the floor. After the assessment, Keating signed off on his quarterly standing. Then she said, "What changed for you?" Danny looked at her. "Ma'am, in the first 2 weeks you were here, you were competent but cautious," she said. "You verified things, which was good, but you verified them quietly in a way that suggested you expected the verification to be wrong." She looked at him steadily. "Something changed around week 4. You've been different since then, more grounded, still careful, but not tentative." Danny thought about how to answer that. I thought about the equipment building, about Logan Pierce's hands on his collar, and the sound of a quiet voice cutting through the room, and the specific feeling of standing in a situation you were right about, but unable to defend. He thought about Ava Mitchell saying, "I had people say something when I needed it, and people who didn't. I know the difference it makes." I thought about the notebook in his left breast pocket, now half full of things he had written down because they were worth keeping. "I met someone," he said, "a senior officer. She showed me what it looked like to know you were right and not need anyone else to confirm it." Keating looked at him for a moment. "Mitchell," she said. Danny nodded. Keating said nothing for a moment. Then, "She has that effect." She picked up her pen. "Keep doing what you're doing, Reyes. You're ahead of where most people are at this stage." Danny walked out of that office and into the hallway and stood for a moment with the assessment still settling in him. Ahead of where most people are. Keating did not say things she did not mean. He filed that information carefully without letting it inflate into something it was not. It was a data point, not a destination, and the point of a data point was to help you understand where you were so that you could keep moving. He pulled out his notebook. He wrote, "The point of knowing where you are is to keep moving from there." Then he put the notebook away and went back to work. The twist that nobody saw coming happened on a Friday morning in the 6th week during a session that had settled into its most functional rhythm yet. There were 8 people in the room. Ava had maintained the rotation carefully, bringing in 2 new participants from the previous cycle while keeping the core group that had been there from the beginning. The room had developed the specific energy of a space where people had gotten past the performance layer and were operating in something more honest, where mistakes were information rather than failures and corrections were received rather than deflected. Ava was working with Chen on a transition sequence. Logan was running Dominguez through a controlled drill on the far side of the mat. Vasquez and Trevino were working independently, occasionally stopping to point something out to each other, having developed a collaborative vocabulary over the past month that was efficient and good-natured, and entirely unlike the competitive dynamic that Logan had seen operate between peers in every other training environment he had been part of. The door opened. Captain Holloway walked in. Not in uniform. In training clothes. The room did not exactly stop, but it redistributed its attention in the way that rooms do when a significant presence enters, adjusting around the new gravity without fully acknowledging it. Holloway looked at Ava. "I heard you were running something worth seeing," she said. "I'm running something worth doing," Ava said. "Which is different." Holloway looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite amusement and not quite something more significant. "Fair distinction," she said. "Can I work?" Ava looked at her. "Do you want to be corrected in front of a room full of people who outrank you?" The room went very still. Holloway looked at the group. 8 faces, all watching with the careful neutrality of people who understood that something interesting was happening and were not yet sure which direction it was going to go. "I've been in more embarrassing situations," Holloway said, "and learned less from them." Ava said, "Then find a space and warm up." Holloway found a space. She warmed up, and the room, which had already been something unusual, became something else entirely, a space where the executive officer of a naval special operations base was doing warm-up exercises alongside a petty officer, a lieutenant junior grade, and a chief petty officer who had once been publicly embarrassed by a woman who was now running the session, and nobody in the room was performing anything for anyone else, because there was simply no room for performance inside what was actually happening. Ava corrected Holloway twice in the first 30 minutes. Both times Holloway said, "Again." Both times she was better. Logan watched this from across the mat and felt something move in his chest that he did not have a ready word for. It was not admiration exactly, though it was adjacent to that. It was closer to the recognition of a principle made visible. The thing Ava had been teaching from the beginning, demonstrated now, not in her own behavior, but in Holloway's and in the room's response to Holloway's behavior. Rank did not protect you from being wrong. It also did not protect you from being correctable. And the people who understood that, who walked into a room and said, "Correct me. Find what I'm doing wrong. Show me the thing. I can't see." Those were the people who kept getting better while everyone around them was busy protecting what they already had. Logan had spent 6 years protecting what he already had. He had no idea what he might have built instead. He was starting to find out. The session ended at 08:30 that Friday. Holloway stayed until the last person left. When the room was down to just her and Ava, she sat on the edge of the mat and drank from her water bottle and looked at the floor with the thoughtful stillness of someone who has just learned something and is letting it settle properly before she moves. "You know what I realized in there," Holloway said. "Tell me," Ava said. "I've been running assessments of instructors on this base for 4 years," Holloway said. "Reading evaluations, sitting in on sessions, reviewing curriculum documents. I thought I had a reasonably clear picture of who was doing what and how well." She paused. "I had no idea this room existed." "You knew about the sessions," Ava said. "I knew a room was booked," Holloway said. "That's not the same thing." She looked up at Ava. "I didn't know what was actually happening in it." Ava waited. "You built something," Holloway said. "Without a program proposal. Without a budget request. Without anyone's permission. You just started doing the work, and the work became this." She gestured at the empty room. "Pierce is different. Vasquez is different. That young sailor Reyes, his supervisor, filed a quarterly note about his progress that was unlike anything I've seen from a 7-week evaluation." Ava listened without expression. "I want to formalize it," Holloway said. "Not to own it or bureaucratize it, but to make sure it survives your reassignment." She looked at Ava. "I want to give it structure, so it outlasts the person who built it." Ava was quiet for a moment. "Structure changes things," she said. "I know. I'm asking you to tell me how to do it without breaking what makes it work." That was the question. The real one underneath the institutional framing. How do you take something that has grown because it was free of structure and give it enough structure to survive without killing the thing that made it worth surviving? Ava thought about her supervisor from the early deployment, the one who had never announced anything. She thought about what that woman had said once in a moment that Ava had not fully understood at the time and had carried with her for 9 years, waiting to understand it. The thing that is genuinely valuable does not need to be protected. It needs to be trusted. Protect the conditions that allow it to exist, and it will protect itself. "Don't name it," Ava said. Holloway looked at her. "Don't give it a program title or a curriculum document or a performance metric," she said. "Give it a room. Give it protected time in the schedule. Set the expectation that the person running it has authority to correct anyone in it, regardless of rank." She paused. "And then leave it alone." Holloway held her gaze for a long moment. "And who runs it after you're gone?" she said. Ava said, "Ask Logan." Holloway's eyebrows rose slightly. Just slightly. "He'll say he's not qualified," Ava continued. "Let him say it. Then tell him you're not asking him to be me. You're asking him to be the next honest person in the room." She paused. "He'll understand what that means. He didn't used to. He does now." Holloway was quiet. "He came to me," Ava said. "He asked to start from the beginning. He sat on a mat and was wrong in front of people who knew him, and he kept showing up." She met Holloway's eyes. "That is more useful to you than a credential. Because a credential is something that happened. That is something that is still happening." Holloway set down her water bottle. She nodded once. The room was quiet. Outside Fort Meridian was running. The base's operational rhythm continued without pause, indifferent to the specific gravity of what had just been decided in a small training room that had no name and no program title and no line item in any budget document. Inside the room, two women sat on the edge of a mat, and one of them had just shaped the future of the other's work without ever once reaching for her own credential to do it. Ava stood up. She picked up her bag. "Same time Monday," she said. Holloway looked up at her. "You're coming back," she said. "I have 6 weeks left," Ava said. "And work to finish." She walked out. The door closed behind her. And somewhere on the other side of the base, Logan Pierce was in his quarters, sitting with a notebook he had started keeping 3 weeks ago, writing down the things he did not want to lose when the room was gone, and the work had to continue on its own, in the only place that had ever really mattered, the inside, where nobody was watching, where the real building had always happened, where it would keep happening now that he finally understood what he was building and why. The last 6 weeks moved the way. Time moves when you know it is running out, not slowly, not quickly, but with a kind of precision that ordinary days do not have. Every session in that room carried extra weight. Not because Ava performed it differently, but because everyone in the room knew the number that was counting down, and knowing it changed the texture of the work without changing the work itself. Logan felt it most acutely on Monday mornings when he walked in, and the room was already in motion, and Ava was already correcting someone, already 3 steps ahead of whatever the group was doing, already building the next thing on top of the last thing in the seamless way that had come to define how she operated. He felt it because he was watching now in a way he had not watched 6 weeks ago. He was watching to remember. He was watching to understand the architecture of it well enough that he could hold the frame up after the person who built it was gone. That was a different kind of watching than he had ever done before. He had spent years watching people to assess them, to find the weakness in their posture, the gap in their reasoning, the moment where their confidence exceeded their capability. That was the watching of competition, which was really a form of preparation for the moment when you would need to replace them in a hierarchy. What he was doing now was different. He was watching to learn how to carry something forward. That required a generosity of attention that the competitive version never had, because you could not carry something forward that you had spent your energy trying to dismantle. He wrote that down in his notebook on a Tuesday night. He was 3 notebooks in by then. Not journals exactly. He did not have the patience for the reflective discursive writing that journals required. They were more like field notes. Observations. Things Ava said, and what he understood them to mean, and what he thought he still did not understand, and needed to sit with longer. The notebooks were the most private thing he had done in 6 years of service. He told no one about them. In the 5th week before Ava's departure, Danny Reyes did something that nobody, including himself, had fully anticipated. He asked Ava if he could attend the morning sessions. He had been working up to it for 2 weeks. He had written and discarded 3 different versions of how to make the request, which told him something about how much the asking mattered to him. He was not someone who drafted and redrafted unless the stakes felt real. He finally made the request on a Wednesday afternoon, catching Ava in the corridor outside the administrative wing, because he had concluded that waiting for the perfect moment was itself a form of hesitation he no longer wanted to practice. "The sessions in the small training room," he said. "I know about them. I'd like to attend." Ava looked at him for a moment, not assessing him exactly, more like confirming something she had already suspected. "What do you want from it?" she said. He had prepared for this question. He had been asked versions of it before by Keating and by others, and he had given versions of the answer about readiness and professional development and the desire to grow. Those answers were true. They were also, he had come to understand, incomplete. "I want to understand how you do it," he said. "Not the technique. I mean the way you walk into a room and you already know who you are. The way you're not performing anything." He paused. "I've been trying to figure out what that comes from. I think the only way to understand it is to be in the room where you're working." Ava was quiet for a moment. "Monday," she said. 0600. Don't be late." He was not late. He was in fact the second person in the room, arriving at 0553 to find Ava already there, already setting up, already inhabiting the space with the complete ease of someone who had done this so many times that the preparation had become invisible even to herself. The session was the hardest thing he had done since arriving at Fort Meridian. Not because the physical demands exceeded his capacity, they pushed him, but they did not break him. The hardest part was the correction. Being corrected in front of people who had weeks or months or years on him. People whose operational experience made his 7 weeks look like a brief introduction, and having to stay present in that correction, rather than retreating into the defensive crouch that was his oldest instinct when he felt exposed. He got it wrong 4 times in the first hour. 4 distinct errors, each corrected by Ava, with the same clean precision she applied to everything, each one requiring him to set down whatever he thought he had understood and pick up the actual thing. After the 4th correction, he looked at Ava and said, "I'm not good at this yet." "No," she agreed. "That's why you're here." He nodded. He reset his position. He went again. Logan watched from across the mat and recognized in Danny's face the exact expression he had been wearing 6 weeks ago. The particular mixture of discomfort and determination that meant someone had decided the discomfort was worth what came after it. That recognition did something to him. He walked over between drills. He stood next to Danny for a moment. "The first week is the worst," he said quietly. Not encouraging exactly, just factual. After that, the corrections stop feeling like failures. Danny looked at him. "What do they feel like?" "Data," Logan said. He walked back to his position. Danny turned back to the mat, and something passed between them in that brief exchange. Something that had been a long time coming from the equipment building to the arena to this room. From the moment Logan Pierce had stood over Danny Reyes, with 6 years of credential raised like a shield to this moment, where the same man stood next to the same young sailor and offered not authority, but information, not dominance, but the honest transmission of something useful. It was a small thing. It was also not small at all. Joel. 3 weeks before Ava left, Logan ran a session alone for the first time. It happened because Ava had a command briefing that ran over. She sent a single message to the group, starting without me. Logan leads. She had not asked him in advance. She had not warned him. The message arrived at 0558, 2 minutes before start time, and Logan read it in the hallway outside the training room with the group already assembling behind him. He stood with the message for about 4 seconds. Then he put his phone in his pocket and opened the door. 8 people looked at him. Vasquez, Trevino, Chen, Dominguez, Carter Webb, 3 others from the recent rotation, and Danny Reyes, who had been attending for 2 weeks and was still deep in the stage of the work where everything was difficult and nothing was automatic. "She'll be here when she can," Logan said. "We start now." He ran the session. Not the way Ava ran it. He understood that immediately. He did not have her particular economy of movement the way she could demonstrate something once and make it feel like the only possible version of that thing. He explained more than she did. He paused longer between sequences. He caught himself twice starting to reach for authority in the old way, the credential, the posture, the voice that said, "I know this, so you should trust me." And both times he pulled back and found a different way in. The second time it happened, Vasquez noticed. He could see it on her face, the slight adjustment of attention that meant she had registered something. After the correction, she asked him, "What was that?" He looked at her. "What was what?" "You stopped in the middle of that explanation and went a different direction." He held her gaze. "I was about to say it the old way." Vasquez did not react for a moment. Then she said, "And the new way is slower," he said. "But it's mine." She nodded once. No additional comment. That was Vasquez's version of approval, which Logan had learned to read over the past month. He finished the session. Ava arrived at 0720, 40 minutes before the end. She came in quietly, found a position, and worked alongside the group without taking over. When the session ended, she said nothing about the 40 minutes she had missed. Later in the corridor, she stopped him. "How did it go?" "Hard," he said. "What was the hardest part?" He thought about it. "Not knowing if I was doing it right," he said. "With you in the room, there's a reference point. I always know roughly where the work is supposed to land, because I can watch you and calibrate. Without that," he paused, "it's just me and my own judgment. And my judgment has been wrong enough times recently that I don't fully trust it yet." Ava looked at him. "That is the most important thing you have said in 6 weeks," she said. He waited. Not trusting your judgment completely is not a weakness, she said. It is the beginning of accurate self-assessment. The people who trust their judgment completely are the ones who stop checking it against reality. She paused. You ran the session. The group worked. Things happened in that room that would not have happened if you had sent them away to wait for me. She looked at him steadily. Your judgment got them that. Logan absorbed that. I want you to run every Thursday session from now until I leave, she said. He looked at her. 3 weeks. 3 Thursdays, she said. And then the Thursday after I'm gone will be yours without a net. He held her gaze. Okay, he said. The second Thursday session was the one that became a story. Logan had been running it for 20 minutes when the door opened and someone walked in that nobody in the room had expected. Captain Holloway they had seen before. Her presence had become semi-regular over the previous weeks, and the group had integrated her the way they integrated every new participant, with the specific neutrality of people who had decided that rank did not exempt you from the work. But the person who walked in that Thursday was not Holloway. It was Admiral Kearns. The room processed that information in approximately 2 seconds, during which time nobody moved and nobody spoke, and the specific gravity of a 3-star admiral entering an unofficial, unnamed, unscheduled morning training session pressed down on the space like a weather system. Logan stood at the center of the room. He felt every old instinct fire simultaneously. Stand straighter. Speak first. Establish who you are before someone else defines the situation. Lead with the credential. Say something that demonstrates authority. He let all of it pass through him without acting on it. Then he said, Good morning, Admiral. Same rules as everyone else. If you're in the room, you work. The group went very still. Kearns looked at him for a moment. He was a compact man, 60 years old, with the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough high-pressure environments to stop being moved by the pressure itself. Understood, Kearns said. He found a space. He began to warm up. Logan resumed the session. He corrected Trevino on a grip sequence. He guided Chen through a transition she had been struggling with for 2 weeks and watched the moment it clicked. The small physical adjustment, followed by the expression of someone who has just understood something at a level deeper than intellectual. He worked alongside Dominguez on a control drill, working his own version of it, while Dominguez worked his, so that the learning was happening in parallel rather than in demonstration. 40 minutes in, he corrected Kearns. It was not theatrical. It was not a statement. Kearns was running a movement sequence, and his weight distribution was off in a way that would have been functionally acceptable in most contexts, but was specifically wrong for the application they were working on, and Logan saw it and said in the same even tone he used with everyone, Your weight is too far forward. You're giving away the leverage before you establish the position. Kearns stopped. He reset. He tried it again. Better, Logan said. He moved on. The room exhaled without exhaling. After the session ended and the group filed out, Kearns stayed. He and Logan stood in the empty room, and for a moment, the silence had the specific texture of two people figuring out what register the next part of the conversation belongs in. How long have you been running these? Kearns asked. Officially 3 Thursdays, Logan said. The full group sessions have been running for about 7 weeks with Mitchell leading. And before that, she was running private sessions. I was the first participant. Kearns looked at him with the attention of someone who has read a file and is now comparing the document to the person standing in front of him. I reviewed the recording of the joint demonstration, Kearns said. Logan held his gaze. Yes, sir. I assumed someone had. You walked onto that floor thinking you were going to prove something. Yes, sir. And instead? Instead, she proved something, Logan said. To 140 people. And then she let me walk away without making it worse than it had to be. Kearns was quiet for a moment. And now you're running her sessions. Trying to, Logan said. I'm not her. No, Kearns said. What are you? The question hung in the room. Logan had been asked versions of it for 6 years in various forms and registers, and he had always answered with the credential. I'm a Navy SEAL. I'm a decorated operator. I'm someone with 6 years and 2 deployments and a record that speaks for itself. He stood in the quiet of the training room. He said, I'm someone who finally figured out what I was building and why it matters and what happens when you stop building and just start defending. He paused. I'm still figuring out the rest. Kearns nodded. Good answer, he said. He walked out. Logan stood alone in the room with that exchange sitting in him, not with pride, but with something more grounded than pride. The specific steadiness of a person who has said a true thing about themselves and found that saying it did not cost them anything. It gave them something instead. Ava's last session was on a Friday. She had not announced it as her last session. The group knew it was coming. Her reassignment date had been on the schedule for weeks, but she had made no ceremony of the approach. She ran the Friday session the way she ran every Friday session, which was the same way she ran every session, regardless of the day. Afterward, the group did not disperse immediately. They stood at the edges of the mat. Vasquez, Trevino, Chen, Dominguez, Carter Webb. The three from this recent rotation, whose names Logan now knew as well as he knew anyone's on this base. Danny Reyes, standing slightly apart in the way of someone who is newer to a community and is not quite certain how much space he occupies in it yet. Nobody had planned anything. There was no speech prepared, no formal gesture organized. What happened instead was what happened when a group of people who have done honest work together in a confined space for weeks find themselves facing the moment when that particular configuration of people will not exist again. Vasquez spoke first. She did not look at Ava. She looked at the mat. I've had a lot of instructors, she said. Good ones. People who knew the material cold and could deliver it clean. She paused. None of them taught me to name what I couldn't do. They taught me to demonstrate what I could. She looked up. You made the gap the point, and I've been in this business long enough to know how rare that is. Trevino said, I've been corrected in front of people I respect more times in 7 weeks than in the previous 4 years, and I'm better for every one of them. Chen said quietly, You showed me that precision and force are not the same thing. I kept confusing them. I still have to think about it, but now I know the difference exists. Dominguez said nothing. He looked at Ava for a long moment, and then he nodded once, which in Dominguez's vocabulary was a complete sentence. Carter Webb said, My brother told me to pay attention to you. He said you were the kind of person you only got to learn from once, and you had to catch it while you could. He was right. Danny Reyes was last. He stood at the edge of the group, the youngest person in the room, the one with the fewest weeks and the least operational history, and the most of the career still ahead of him. He had his notebook in his hand. He had taken it out without fully deciding to. He looked at Ava. I've been writing things down, he said. Things you said. Things I saw in this room. Things I didn't have words for until after they happened. He paused. I don't know how to say what this has meant, but I know that I'm different than I was when I walked into that equipment building, and the difference started with you. He stopped. Then he said simply, Thank you. Ava looked at all of them. She stood in the center of the room the way she had always stood in it, not performing stillness, just still. Not managing the moment, just in it. The work you've done in this room, she said, was yours. I provided the structure. You provided everything that actually matters. She looked at each of them in turn. What you built in here, the ability to be wrong in front of people, you respect, to receive correction without deflecting it to keep showing up after the correction that does not leave when I do. You take it with you. And then it's your job to put it in a room somewhere and do for someone else what was done for you. She paused. That's all this has ever been, she said. Someone doing the work honestly and then giving it forward. She picked up her bag. She looked at Logan. He was standing at the edge of the group, arms at his sides, with the expression of someone who is committing something to memory rather than to language. Not trying to capture it. Trying to hold it. Thursday, she said. 0600. He understood. She walked out. The Thursday after Ava left was the hardest session Logan had run. Not because the work was different. The sequence was the same. The group was the same. The mat, the room, the 0600, start all of it identical in every external dimension to what had been there before. What was different was the absence. Not her presence exactly. She had been preparing him for the absence for weeks, pulling back incrementally so that his judgment could find its own footing. What was absent was the net. The knowledge that if something went wrong, if he made a mistake or lost the thread, or found himself standing in the old way, There was someone in the room whose understanding of the work was deeper than his, and who would set it right. There was no one to set it right now except him. He ran the session. Hi Mod, 2 errors. One was technical. He demonstrated a pivot incorrectly, caught it himself, corrected it on the spot without drama. The other was more subtle. He felt himself moving toward the credential in a moment of instructional uncertainty, reaching for the old language of authority as a substitute for the cleaner language of honest engagement, and he stopped mid-sentence, looked at the group and said, "Let me try that again." He tried it again. It was better. Vasquez, who was watching with the precise attention she brought to everything that mattered, gave him the single nod afterward. He understood. 8 weeks after Ava left Fort Meridian, something happened in the training room that she would not learn about until much later. Logan was running a Thursday session. The group had expanded again, 11 people now, the rotation cycling through the base's personnel in the quiet, unofficial, unnamed way that Holloway had protected without formalizing. Danny Reyes had become a regular. He had also, in the past 6 weeks, started arriving early enough to help set up, which was the specific behavior of someone who has moved from participant to stakeholder without anyone declaring the transition. A new participant arrived that morning. A junior officer 3 weeks into her first assignment at Fort Meridian. Lieutenant Elise Park, aviation intel background, technically sharp, with the kind of quiet confidence that sometimes manifested as guardedness in new environments. She had heard about the sessions from Chen. She had arrived without knowing exactly what to expect. 20 minutes in, Logan corrected her on a movement sequence. She stiffened slightly. The old reflex, the one that said correction equals criticism equals threat to standing. Logan saw it. He said, "The correction means you're close. If you weren't close, I wouldn't bother being specific." She looked at him. "Try it again," he said. "But this time, let the movement be a question rather than a statement." She tried it again. It was better. Measurably, specifically, in a way she could feel. She looked up. "What does that mean, a question rather than a statement?" "It means you're not deciding the outcome before you move," he said. "You're asking the movement what it wants to do instead of telling it where to go." She was quiet for a moment. "Someone told you that," she said. "Yes," Logan said. "And now I'm telling you." He moved on. Danny, working on the far side of the mat, had heard the exchange. He did not look up, but his hand moved briefly to the pocket where his notebook lived, the gesture of someone who has heard something worth writing down and is noting it for later. The session continued. The work continued. 6 months after the demonstration. 6 months after Logan Pierce had stood in front of 440 people and gone to the mat in 4 seconds and walked away carrying the most useful humiliation of his career, Captain Holloway held a ceremony in the main conference room. It was not a large ceremony, not a base-wide event. 30 people, roughly the core group from the training room. Several senior personnel who had been watching the room's effects ripple outward into the base's operational culture, and a handful of others who had earned their way into the space by being honest about what they did not know. The ceremony was for Logan, who was being recognized for what the official language called distinguished contribution to the installation's professional development culture, which was the institutional way of saying you built something real, and you built it by changing yourself first, and the base is different because of it. Holloway read the citation. Logan stood and received it with his hands at his sides and his face arranged in something that was not quite discomfort and not quite ease. The expression of a man who was still learning how to receive what he had actually earned rather than what he had used to claim. When Holloway finished, she said, "Is there anything you'd like to say?" Logan looked at the group. Vasquez, Trevino, Chen, Dominguez, Danny Reyes, who had a notebook in his breast pocket and a quarterly standing that was now the highest of any sailor in his rotation. Carter Webb, Dominguez, Holloway herself, Admiral Kearns, who had come quietly and was standing at the back of the room with the stillness of someone who had wanted to see how this moment would land. Logan said, 6 months ago, I walked onto a training mat in front of 1,400 people because I was trying to prove something. The room was very still. I proved something, he said. Just not what I intended. He paused. I spent 6 years building a reputation, and I confused that with building a self. A reputation is something other people hold. A self is something you build in private in the spaces between the visible things in the sessions nobody attends, and the corrections nobody witnesses, and the notebooks you keep that no one will ever read. He looked at the group. I didn't start building the real thing until someone showed me the difference. He paused. She's not here, he said. But this room is. And every person who walks into it is going to get the most honest version of this work that I am capable of delivering. Because that's what she gave this base. Not a program, not a methodology, not a credential. He looked at the floor for a moment. She gave us a standard. And the standard is show up, be correctable, do the work when nobody is watching, and then give it forward. He looked up. That's all I have, he said. The room did not erupt. What happened was quieter and more durable, the specific quality of appreciation that professional people express when something true has been said in a setting that usually tolerates something less. Holloway stepped forward. She extended her hand. Logan shook it. Across the room, Danny Reyes had his notebook out. He was writing, in the back. Admiral Kearns nodded, once turned and walked out the way he had come in, quietly, without ceremony. The way people move when they have seen what they needed to see and trust the room to carry the rest. The room was still running on the last Thursday of the year. No name, no program title, no line item in any budget document. Just a booking in the scheduling system, 0600 to 0830, repeating weekly in the small training room that everyone on the base now knew about, and that remained by design smaller than the demand for it. Logan walked in at 0553. He was the first one there. He set up the space, the way Ava had always set it up. Mat check equipment placement, the particular arrangement that said the room is ready and the work is about to begin. He stood in the center of it. I was not the same man who had stood in an equipment building 11 months ago with a young sailor's collar in his hand, and 6 years of credential raised like armor. He was not the same man who had walked onto an arena floor in front of 1,400 people because his pride had overruled his judgment. He was not the same man who had stood against a corridor wall listening to people talk about someone else and feeling the absence of his own name as a wound. How was a man who had been corrected honestly and repeatedly by someone who was better at the work than he was, and who had chosen to receive the correction rather than deflect it. He was a man who had learned that the most powerful thing he could do was not to prove what he knew, but to help someone else discover what they didn't. He was a man with 3 notebooks full of things he had been learning since the day he decided to stop defending and start building. The door opened. Danny Reyes came in first. Notebook in his pocket. Posture grounded. The eyes of someone who has been in this room long enough to know what it asks of you and who shows up anyway. Then Vasquez. Then Chen. Then 3 others from the rotation, all of them carrying the specific energy of people who have somewhere real to be and know it. Logan looked at the group. Ready, he said. They said yes. The work began. Because in the end, that is what genuine excellence looks like. Not a title claimed in a crowded room, not a credential announced before a disagreement, not a reputation defended against the people honest enough to challenge it. It looks like a person in a quiet room at 6 in the morning, doing the work that no one required them to do, building something they will eventually give away for the only reason that has ever made any of it matter. Because they were ready, and they chose to be